Okay, the recording has started. So this is the October 23rd, 2018 Rook Community Meeting. And let's go ahead and start with our milestone checkups. 0.8 has nothing there, and we don't have any plans for any patch releases that I'm aware of.
The one issue that is still an issue for some people is the flex driver load issue. And someone posted that they were trying to work around where they just have sort of a cron job touch the flex driver directory, and that seemed to be working so far for them a little better. So anyway, we may have a workaround, hopefully, that will help people get past that, and we don't need a release for that.
Have we heard anything on the upstream issue?
No, I haven't been able to get any response there from upstream. I've tagged them a couple times in the issue, but yeah, it'd be nice to get traction there because it's, yeah, I don't know if anybody else is using Flex more than or as much as Rook, so it's like they aren't paying attention to it with CSI.
Yeah, it is definitely not a big priority, that's for sure. Okay, let's talk about 0.9 stuff here. So let's go ahead and instead of going through this list, talk about some of the higher priority or bigger items there. Maybe the board will be a better look. So one of the things, I don't know if Giannis is on the call. I doubt he is with the time zones, but he successfully created a pull request for the Cassandra operator. And I took a full pass through that review there, and he's incorporating some of that feedback. So it looks like that is in pretty decent shape, I think, from the review that I did for being included in 0.9 and having a functional Cassandra operator. So that's exciting.
Yeah, I'm planning to take a look at it too. So I'll try to do it this week. Yeah.
Awesome. So the CSI, I guess we can kind of work down a little bit on some of the important tickets here. Do you guys want to give a status update on the CSI plugin?
Let's see, is Waman on the call?
Is Waman on the call?
No. But yeah, looks like he is. You there, Waman? Okay. Well, I'll give a summary unless he chimes in. But, the CSI plugin is coming along, and I think he's got it tested and working. I think there's an integration step here that we were talking about a few days ago, where really integrating it with Rook, because right now it's a separate. You got to build an image and deploy that, and I think there's an opportunity to build it into Rook so that the operator can just deploy it and make it a more streamlined process that way. So that actually we still need to get a ticket open to track that discussion and that work.
Are we envisioning running it like having a side-by-side thing with the flex volume support, or is it going to completely wholesale replace it in 0.9?
No, I'd anticipate we could run side-by-side because with CSI, you really need 1.12, Kubernetes 1.12, where
Right.
it's enabled. And well, it was beta in 1.10, I think, but there's some feature that it wasn't, didn't make it really stable until 1.12. I can't remember which one that was.
I was imagining, Travis, that it would kind of how the Rook agent drops the flex volume driver, that we would do the same with CSI.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
Is that okay?
But you're talking about build integration, Travis, that we can do like make in the Rook repo that you'll have the CSI image to, or what kind of integration are you talking about?
Well, talking about, we'd build, there's the CSI code, we could build it as, a Go package, just pull it in, and then we can deploy just like we deploy our agent and Flex. So, we haven't talked through the details there, but yeah. And maybe where it's Kubernetes 1.12, we could just CSI and where it's less than that, maybe we deploy Flex. I'm not sure. I'm not sure we'll work all this out in 1.9 timeframe. But I'd like to have CSI more documentation around, at least, so people can use it more.
So I think there's people already working on it. There was a PR just to document how CSI is deployed and used under Rook. That PR is more or less look good to me. There's some technical issues, but the good news is has been tested, and me and some other people. There are still a couple of issues in CSI driver itself. We're going to resolve them, and once that happened, we can consider migrating to CSI drivers on Kubernetes 1.12 and plus.
Well, I mean, one of the things that CSI does now is the concept of a volume attachment, which the Rook agent has its own volume attachment object.
Yeah.
Do you see the Rook volume attachment going away?
Essentially, they do more or less. Yeah, they more or less do the same thing. I would suggest we move away and use the entry API instead of using the CRDs or the attachment CRD. That makes it better to manage. For those, I don't know what the migration path is. We can just say the green field or just ground field. So for green field, it's relatively easy. For brown field, it could be some migration process. We need to convert the CRDs into the attachments API. We can make them happen. So I don't think that is a significant change.
And so you're saying we'd use the external attacher as well, or
yeah,
Rook would have its own?
We need to use the external attacher. That makes our life easier because I believe the attacher actually there were some differences. The driver talks to the attacher. So if the driver cannot just look at the CRDs for the information, it's going to be a lot of overhead if we are doing that path. So we better just use the attacher itself.
Okay. Did you say there was a design on this somewhere or a notes capture somewhere?
No, you mean the converting the Rook API into
just kind of the general approach to bringing CSI into Rook.
Oh, there was a design spec. It's merged in a design. I think it's merged into a design spec directly. And there's also a PR just about how to use CSI, and starts everything up, creates the RBAC, creates the driver, creates volume, creates storage class, and also use the snapshots, external snapshots controller. Yeah, I think that's a top one.
Yeah, and then I think we, based on our discussion a few days ago, I think we needed either update the design or, just update the design around what the integration will look like so we can deploy it more automatically instead of having separate steps to deploy the driver, right?
Is that conversation that was on this pull request, or is that conversation that you had elsewhere?
On the Rook Slack channel. So we had.
I think I'd have a preference in general, at least, if there's a design that's being proposed and there's a pull request for it, that communication about it or discussion about it happens on the pull request itself for archiving purposes instead of being on Slack.
Yeah, we need to document it.
And just at a high level to make sure I understand this. So when we bring in CSI, flex volume just becomes a legacy thing for Kubernetes 1.12 and before, or 1.11 and before. Mm-hmm. Is that the path we're taking? We would actually replace flex volume usage with CSI on newer clusters.
Yeah, hopefully that's gonna happen in that path.
Cool. And that enables snapshots through volume snapshots as well by doing that?
Oh, this is an external thing. So we can just, the truth is once we have the CSI deployed and people may want to use the new features, then they can just use this right away instead of we have to put limitations. So the external provisioner, the external snapshotter, is part of the upstream CSI development. So this makes great use case here. and it's already supported by the RBD driver. One of the few drivers that have this feature enabled. So I would suggest to use it. It makes good use case as well. So
that's great.
Cool. And last question I had real quick is we had a discussion for quite a long time, or interest at least, in having dynamic provisioning for CephFS as well. Does the CSI plugin here have any aspirations to support CephFS dynamic provisioning too?
Yeah, it's already implemented by a gentleman called Robert, and he basically have the CephFS driver as well as the snapshots. As well as the provisioner. So that is working perfectly well. And we, just put it into context. When I say perfectly well, it means functionally working. We haven't run the CSI certification test yet. We are going to do that as part of integration. So once that happens, we have great confidence. This is ready to use. Faster certification, specs-wise, is working.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great that would be included as well, because I think that the dynamic provisioning flow is really, really useful and good for users. It's a good experience. So having it for both block and file is really awesome, I think.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, let's look back at the board here. And Travis, I had seen your pull request, and a couple of us had provided feedback on decoupling the Ceph and Rook versions. Any update on that? Has that been incorporated?
I believe I've incorporated all the feedback, and the testing looks good for me on Luminous and Mimic and Nautilus, except a couple of new features that need some work to, there's a new orchestrator module that I was trying to enable, and that needs a little more work to it to be enabled in the images. But overall, what I'm just waiting for is the publishing of the manifests for the Ceph image. They're published to the Ceph, like AMD 64 and ARM, but the manifest's still working through some kinks to Blaine and Sebastian are working on that.
Is there a projected date for Nautilus?
February.
Awesome.
Yeah, so that'll effectively be, for Rook, it'll be effectively in development mode, or not officially supported.
Right.
Basically.
Yep. Yeah, the goal for 0.9 here was Mimic support, right?
Yeah.
Yep. Great. Alexander, I think a couple of us had taken a look at your pull request for supporting arbitrary PVs. How is that going in terms of your time that you get to focus on it or drive that to completion?
I have paused my work on that because is Dimitri here? Dimitri.
I don't see him in the list. No, him or John.
Because last community meeting, I think this was their priority to get multi-tenancy on CephFS instead of using NFS.
Right, and that's 2164 here.
Yes, that's
got it. How's that going? Is that are you in the implementation phase still?
There's one smaller thing that I need to fix in point of review, and I still need to add a test or two. And the tests right now at least are failing. So, I would need to add some tests, or is it a? Oh, it's probably an issue. Yeah. Okay. At the moment right now, the CI should be green too, but there are no new tests, or only a small test where it is simply checking that the arguments are correctly set if a username is set.
Okay, cool. So that's still a priority for you, and I know that it's a priority.
It's a priority. The arbitrary is after that then. Yes.
Yeah, awesome. That sounds great, Alex. Thank you. Are there any other 0.9 milestone issues that people want to bring up here? Some of the more important long pole stuff.
Stuff volume is in there somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't drag it. Okay. Yeah. 1342.
Yeah, that's we're just getting started with that really, and we really want that to be in 1.9.
Are you the owner of that implementation, Travis?
Yes, and
a confident yes.
Well, and a couple other people have expressed interest in it, so we're we need to collaborate and really drive who's doing what piece of it. And I've provided some pointers so far because I've been distracted with other things, but yeah, it's time to buckle down and get going on the code there.
What's the overall
doc too? But
what's the overall timing for 0.9?
Well, the plan is before KubeCon for sure. So
okay,
end
awesome.
of November, I would hope.
That's what I wanted to hear. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Probably the week of December 3rd is the drop dead date.
Yeah,
exactly.
Okay.
All right.
I have 3 more issues that I would like to see for 0.9, as they are blocking good production usage. That is the 1507 on node lost a new pod can't mount the same volume, second from above.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to be still an issue for people. The next one is 2147, draining a Rook node, 2147, yes. As that's, well, basically blocking, well, people from rebooting their servers. And we need to find some kind of solution to, not have this anymore.
This is the RBD kernel module waiting on the network.
Yeah, but the network's already shut down. As far as I understand from that issue, it's simply because RBD, well, normally there would be an RBD unmap service that will be executed just before the network goes down, as far as I know. But it seems there isn't really a function executed in kubelet when it is shut down, or more or less the system is shut down. Maybe Sage or Travis can say more in point of if RBD basically accepts to have the RBD volumes unmapped before shutdown or stopping of network.
If you want to do an orderly shutdown, you have to do it while the network is still working. I believe there's a force unmap option that you can use if the network stopped.
Wasn't it first implemented with kernel 4.
I don't
4
remember.
Something?
I don't remember.
I think there was something with it. Yeah. We should look into that to see if there's any way we can fix that, because it's bad for the production if you need to reboot a node and then have to manually do the power reset, the hard power reset.
I seem to recall that they hit this exact same issue with Ceph Helm way back when. I could go back and look at I think they just changed the system to unit timing probably to make it stop first. But
we saw the same issue also on CoreOS machines, and they just added a system D dependency on the network, and that helped.
Yeah.
So I wonder.
You think we need to?
Yeah. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that would be probably from hearing what you say, a thing that we need to get documented at the different at stuff like Chorus, which is specific, and then in our documentation. Because I think not everyone, especially platform as a service where you can run Rook, would have this option there set. So yeah, we need to see.
Yeah, I'm definitely in favor, Alex, of, addressing this in any way that we can. If there's some documentation we can add, then that would be great. If there's, something more automated, that would be great. But I do agree with you too that this hurts our production reliability story for sure. So it's a difficult problem, and I'm not sure exactly what the best solution is, but I support you in saying that this is important. You said there's a third issue too, Alex. What was the third one?
The third one is 2123. Well, security. Yeah, it would be good if we, I don't know, the dumbest thing I could think of would be to have some functionality in the logger just before it's getting written to standard out or standard error, which runs a string replace and goes over all the secrets before it's being written.
Did you see the suggestion that I offered? That it's essentially you don't pass it on the command line anymore, and therefore it wouldn't get written to the logs either.
Right.
Yeah, in general, using secret files is a much better approach.
Yeah. But I think for CFFS we're already using them. Oh, which is it? Oh no, for CFFS leak. I could have sworn we already use a key file for that.
No, I don't think we are, because that's how it's ending up in the log.
No, okay. I'll depending on if I remember till then, I'll go ahead and assign it to me, because I'm already messing around with the flex volume in part of the where is it? Allow us specifying custom self user and secret name for mounting.
That's right. Yep,
and I basically stumbled exactly upon the same part where it's like, render the keyring. And I could take a look. I'll take a look.
Cool. Well, yeah, my suggestion here is persisted on the issue here. It's good to add stuff to GitHub directly so that everyone can see them later on. Cool. All right. So I think that's everything for 0.9. We can move on to the rest of the agenda. So Brian, are you on the line here to talk about the Alameda's dynamic resource allocation?
Yeah, I'm over here.
All righty. Let's see if I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so that perhaps you can start sharing yours.
Let me find it. Can you guys see it?
Yes, that is a cool desktop background, by the way.
Thank you. All right, so we are Professore. We're an AI company. We're working on Project Alameda. It's an open source intelligent resource orchestrator for Kubernetes. We use machine learning to predict the future pod and node resource usage. So we can redistribute the pods across clusters, or we can elastically set the pod resource like CPU and memory requests and limits to best fit predicted usage. And here's our GitHub and our Slack, and also you can email me if you want more information. So this is our basic architecture and how we want to work with Rook. I believe I showed this to Assam last week, and then Sage also. This is, so the first thing we do is we watch for objects that have our annotations in it, and then we send a signal to the AI Alameda plane, and that'll use the Prometheus, and also we have a data exporter on the worker nodes to collect all the metrics, send it to our prediction engine, and our prediction engine will create the future resource usage, and then we'll expose the raw prediction data back onto the Kubernetes cluster, as well as have some AI recommendations that are our own CRDs that our controller uses. And then, of course, we can just stop here and then people can use the predictions for themselves, but we want to do like the first example so that people can, copy us or like use it themselves. And then our feedback. So once we automate the recommendations with our controllers, we send back the results, and then we enhance our AI learning. And then, I want to ask you guys some feedback about this architecture later, but let me just go on about the CRD objects. So for the community version, the operator would have to create their own objects with our annotations, and then they have to match the labels with each object. So we know which which objects to automate. And then for the commercial, we'll just code it directly into our operator, and then they just add the annotations directly on their own objects, and we'll look for it. And then here's an example of the pod resource prediction. You can see, sorry, we have a whole list of pods here, and then so we predict the future CPU utilization. We also have a tab for memory, and then we give you the recommended request and limit. And then this one is the pod allocation across nodes. We see the predicted usage of pods, and then we just reallocate them to level out the usage across your whole cluster. And then lastly, we have a map to show you visually like the impact of every persistent volume and disk and OSD to your application. And
Ryan, can you go back to slide 7 for a second?
Sure.
Are you you're annotating the deployment here, not the volumes?
This is just,
or is that an example?
It's just an example. We just want to match the labels basically, so that we can find the same object in the cluster.
Got it. And then your prediction goes back onto separate CRDs that hold the prediction, so that like say the operator can react to that.
Yeah, we have our own, we will create our own objects that our operator watches for, but also we'll expose the raw prediction data as like an endpoint or something. It's still up in the air. We're just looking for feedback, or if there's any interest in this kind of thing with Rook or the Rook community.
I mean, I think the discussion that was interesting is that if you have an AI engine that can annotate persistent volumes with predictions, then an operator like Rook could make scheduling decisions based on those predictions. For example, it could decide not to avoid a certain persistent volume or node. It can even disrupt running certain OSD there and update whatever needs to on crush maps and move it, right? Yeah. And having that all kind of happen at the CRD level, like and not necessarily plugins and code. Like if an annotation shows up that we're watching for in Rook that says there's a prediction on a volume or a node, that could feed into the next scheduling decision or even a disruption.
Yeah, so that's what I was saying, where we can just stop here at the AI recommendations and the raw prediction data and just expose that. But then we want to also just do a little bit more, right? We want to make an example for the rest of the community so it's easier for them to use us.
Got it.
So,
okay.
Well, I wanted to ask about this architecture, right? So you see how our controller executes a recommendation directly on the operator created objects. I'm not sure if the operator would see the change and then maybe change it back. I'm not sure.
I think it'll be cleaner to just create a prediction object and have the operators that want to support this watch it.
Okay.
Yeah, the operator will overwrite all the resources it creates, but the CRDs it doesn't overwrite. So working with the CRDs would be the more natural.
So if you had something like a persistent volume prediction and a node prediction object that you created based on the data that you've collected and all the predictions that you have, then an operator like Rook could say, it could add it to a list of watchers that it has on a number of things, and when it sees a prediction, it could factor that into a scheduling decision or a placement decision.
Right.
Yeah. I just want to add a point. So basically, Rook just creates, there's two things in the Rook. There's operator, just creates all the CRDs and creates the clusters. And the other thing, just you create the cluster. In my opinion, which may not be the best, is that when you Rook watch the cluster and somebody else can also watch the cluster. So maybe you can use some of the webhook or something. When you see cluster objects, you can just modify the resource consumption, resource and the placements in the cluster objects before Rook actually creates the cluster.
Okay, so beforehand, before it actually creates it, we modify it and then send it to the operator.
Yeah, but the thing may not be the best. I mean, that's just a possibility. It may not be the best.
Well, I mean, I think one of the having the Alameda operator and the Rook operator not collide on objects, I think makes it a lot easier to implement. And so if the Alameda operator only created and was authoritative for its own prediction CRDs, and the Rook operator just consumed and watched those, then there would be no need for any kind of coordination between the two operators.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I think that, and that it also means that whoever wants to write an operator like a Cassandra thing or whatever kind of operator can just, and wanted to factor in predictions, they could just watch those CRDs and use them however they want.
Yeah, we think that's the best approach also. It's just, I guess our team wants to do some more work. I guess they want to make an example for the community. That's it.
Understood.
Yeah, we just want to, we already can just expose all the prediction data and recommendation, and anyone can use it. It's just, I guess they want to do a little more. Yeah. So yeah, I agree also that that's the best way to just let the third party decide themselves how to use it.
Cool. So are you guys kind of trying to work through the design and get that in?
So we have the Alameda operator and everything already done. It's just our first example, we wanted to use Rook Ceph specifically, Ceph on Kubernetes, but and then we're just hoping to get some feedback, like if you guys had any interest in this kind of thing or want to give any suggestions. There was one other question I had. So every time we apply the resource change, we would have to restart the pod. And then that's not very, so for a lot of storage solutions, it's not very friendly to them. So we wanted to know if there's another way to do that, to apply resource changes.
I think it depends on what the resource change is that you want to make.
Okay.
If you want to change the size of the OSD caches, for example, that's something that you just tell the OSD to do on its own, and it'll adjust the amount of memory that it's consuming. And if I understand correctly, Rook isn't even setting a memory limit on those pods currently. So you would just, probably the Rook operator would watch CRD, see that prediction change, and then just do a Ceph config set or something like that to match.
Yeah, and that's why I like the operator making the decision, not something externally saying what it needs to do, because
it'll be implementation dependent.
Exactly.
All right. Okay, yeah, that's pretty much.
I think this is great work. I'd love to see this personally. I'd love to see this, integration happen.
I think another slick thing is if you could get usage information on PVs and feed that back, we could use the new RBD live migration thing where we could actually move the RBD image between different performance tiers based on predicted usage too. That might be pretty cool. Do auto tiering at this level.
Yeah, I think we have that already. Capacity prediction and performance prediction, degradation on PVs. But yeah, that's a good. Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it. All right, so just doing a time check here. We have 22 minutes left, and we have a couple of items that both say 15 minutes. So let's see if we can make good timing through here. I have a hard stop at 10, and I don't know if you can change ownership to another person on the meeting. So let's try to make good progress here. So let's. I'm going to start sharing my screen again. But the next topic was migrating the CI, continuous integration stuff, to the CNCF infrastructure. So we have Travis and Greg both on the line, I think.
Yep. So we've had initial discussions. I dumped whatever I had in my head around the CI, sent that to Greg, and he said he could help us out here and get this work item done. And Yeah, it'd be great to get more input here on what needs to happen.
So the
Thanks,
last,
Greg, and welcome, Greg. Thank you for volunteering here.
yeah, definitely. That would, I think that Travis would probably personally thank you the most for any sort of this effort with babysitting some of the builds to get PRs through.
Yep.
But so anyways, the last time that or the first time that I looked at this, it was the process was opening an issue in I think they call it the CrossCloud CI repo that the CNCF owns, and then there wasn't much traction after that. So Greg, are you already familiar with that process of what it takes to integrate with the CrossCloud CI and stuff?
No, this is my first look at that. My expertise is more in just CI in general and in Jenkins, which I see is what you use. So I was completely unfamiliar with CrossCloud until Travis mentioned it in his email.
Got it. And I don't think we have any resident expertise on that either. The only exposure that we had was, that initial sort of request by opening an issue in the repo saying that we have interest in integrating. So I think that there would be some learning and some collaboration to do there about what the steps are.
Yeah, absolutely. It looks like they have not touched your issue at all. I'm looking at it here.
And I can definitely admit that I haven't followed up on it personally either. So that's a two-way street, I assume.
But like literally no action on it from them means there's got to be some other buttons to push, and so I guess in the absence of anybody knowing that, I can just start to dive into their docs and start to reach out and see what I can find to see who do we have to prod in order to get at least some acknowledgement on the process here.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And I think right now we could probably talk like what the high level goals are. So do we, I think, is it a plan here that, the hosting of the Jenkins solution would be done by the CNCF in their environment, that we remove that hosting from how it's currently being done?
Yeah, that's a good idea, I think.
I mean, I think they have a large cluster and they have access and credits from all sorts of public clouds. That would make sense that we could leverage their infrastructure, given that this is a CNCF project.
Yeah, definitely. I would be very curious too if, because a lot of what I had heard about their infrastructure, especially their large cluster there, is twofold. One of them being scalability, where you have access to larger number of resources than you might normally, and than you definitely do in our tiny little Jenkins environment that we've been hosting so far. And the other one is, which I thought was kind of interesting as well, is that there is a focus on integration and playing nicely together with other CNCF projects. So, deploying Rook in a cluster that has, Prometheus and FluentD and, Jaeger and all sorts of, other CNCF projects to make sure that as the ecosystem as a whole is integrated and, not stomping on each other in certain ways. So that's something that's kind of interesting as well. I'd say that's not a primary goal, but it's an interesting goal that we could potentially benefit from by moving to being hosted by the CNCF.
There's also, on a related note, they run, I think, the certification suite for Kubernetes, and it would be nice if Rook was regularly run as part of the certification suite.
Does that run on official releases, Bassam, or is that like a nightly master thing? Or
I'm not sure. It seems to run on. They run it somewhere because they publish results, so I don't know what the frequency is.
And so the action items that we need to talk about are having parity, moving over our existing CI, and then these additional things like that certification run. Sounds great. Are there other things to consider while we're adding?
I mean, I think the only high level thing I'll say is that what we're really missing at this point, besides just stability of, runs in Jenkins, is kind of long run testing, performance testing, and scaling and upgrade testing. And so those are if we were to start with figuring out how to make the existing environment more stable for just PR runs and master builds, but focused our energy on maybe adding performance testing, scale testing, upgrades, all those things that take longer that we could run as part of a release. That seems like a higher priority to me.
So adding the tests before moving, or you're saying stabilizing first on CNCF and then adding those?
Honestly, I'm not sure that moving, like for running tests and unit tests and the kind of BVT test that we run as part of a PR, I'm not sure yet that that's a good fit for CrossCloud CI.
So then is the goal to move testing to CNCF, or is the goal to maintain current testing, or to maintain the current environment to run what tests it can and move the stuff that can be run on CNCF over there?
I think it's, if you think about it as the tests that run as part of every build, I believe that what we're doing now with Jenkins, if it were more stable, is still the right home for it. But the testing that you want to do as part of a release cycle of testing on different clouds and infrastructure and platforms, and doing all sorts of tests that could take, you know, days or even a week to run, the CrossCloud CI is probably a better fit for that. I don't think combining the two is going to be feasible.
Okay, so sort of like a tier 1 testing that stays on the current Jenkins, right, but then move the tier 2 stuff up to CNCF.
There very little tier 2 we have right now. So
yeah, move it there and then expand it once it's there.
Right, yeah, expanding on the tests. So yeah, so stabilizing the tests is certainly my first goal. And, you know, there's some probably small things to do, like upgrade our Jenkins. But, okay, yeah, I hadn't understood that. Yeah, the CNCF would really be more for future expansion of the tests, but that makes sense to me now.
So in that case, you know, from a logistical perspective, that some of those operations, like upgrading Jenkins or managing its instances in some way, those, not everyone has access for that, right? That's, I think, you know, it's hosted by Upbound right now, right? So I don't know how we can best manage those type of operations.
We're happy to give access to whoever needs it.
Okay.
Greg, you can get access. It's all hosted in AWS right now, and we'd be happy to give you access.
Okay. Great. What version of Jenkins is currently there?
Old.
Like version 1 dot, or?
I don't know that off the top of my head, actually. That's a great question.
Yes, it is 1 dot.
Okay. So very old.
Yeah, and
1.3.2.
There's nothing, we're not tied. Yeah.
Go ahead.
There's, you know, we should take that offline, but there's no, we're happy to upgrade it and figure out what the path is. So.
Yeah, I think what we're currently limping around with right now is what we migrated over from our first incarnation of the CI. So I think that, you know, we just haven't had resources to try to build something, you know, more new with stability, excuse me, and, you know, latest plugins and all that sort of stuff. So I think that there definitely is support for wanting to have something new and reliable.
Okay, I have some experience. There's automation out there that I had worked on in a previous role to automate stand up of Jenkins. It's a set of Ansible roles that live out on GitHub. So if it's possible to just drop and replace and move the jobs over, that should be pretty easy or straightforward. We've also used the playbooks to upgrade existing Jenkins, but I don't know about going all the way back to ancient history.
Yeah, Greg, let's
take
this one offline, because I think we'll talk about where Jenkins is hosted and all that stuff. I think let's take that offline maybe.
Sounds perfect.
All right, cool. Yeah, Greg, so I think we'll all be very grateful for your effort and your initiative that you're bringing here. So thank you very much, Greg.
Absolutely.
All right, so we've got 12 minutes left. So let's go ahead and launch into the service broker for RGW discussion as well. Who wants to kick that off? Travis or Sage?
Yeah, well, I just linked the ticket there. There's been some discussion, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just to broadly set so there's a strong desire to have automated dynamic provisioning of buckets. The question is, the default choice is to use a service broker just because that's how a bunch of other stuff is being implemented. And there actually is an implementation of RGW that uses service broker already. So that's one path. But there's concern about the friction that involves. So Erin is here on the call. She's got a lot of experience with the other service catalog stuff that Red Hat's doing. But I'm just hoping that we can sort of come to some consensus or figure out what we need to sort out in order to make a decision.
Cool.
Yeah, Sage, I think that had been one of my initial, somewhat large concerns as well, is that the friction that comes along with having to run service catalog or open service broker that requires its own etcd instance since it's using the aggregated API, and having that flow be part that dependency and experience be part of what we currently have in Rook does, as you mentioned, bring in some friction that I personally too am concerned about.
So I guess my question is the end user experience different if they're posting an object that's defined as a CRD or they're posting something that the service broker is interpreting? I'm not the Kubernetes guy, so I don't really understand what's going on behind the scenes.
Just to add up, even before we go there, I'm kind of curious. So if I understand it correctly, the open service broker lets you provision, provision essentially managed services and use them from your application. Isn't, from a layering standpoint, why can't the service broker, somebody who's using a service broker, like provision a Rook and use an object CRD within Rook? Why doesn't Rook act as one of those managed services that's being brokered?
I think it could, but again, I'm not the service broker person. I'm just trying to get the right people in the room. Erin, are you there?
I am just trying. Can't find the unmute button.
Thanks.
So I think there's a lot of unknowns. The driving force is we want to try to make everything be as a service as possible, right? And being that customers want to quickly deploy, buckets to store objects in, and doing it from the service catalog provides a nice user experience where, you're not having to understand the ins and outs of the storage provider or set anything up. You can just go to the catalog and, quickly provision that and have, a URL to go ahead and push things to. So that's the driving force. Why we don't do some things over other things, I don't think it has to be that way. I don't think we're required one way or the other. The idea was to come up with some sort of workflow that's easy for customers that makes sense from the service catalog. Does that make more sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess where I was going with this is that assuming somebody was using an open service broker today, or the service catalog today in a Kubernetes cluster, and they're happy with it. If they were in a public cloud and they wanted to use a bucket, then presumably S3 or whatever, Google Storage or whatever is available to them as a service, and then they could provision that through the open service broker.
Yes, and that's
if they were on an on-premise cluster. The model I was kind of have in my head is what the experience should be. We should strive to get a similar experience for people that want to use the service broker. why can't Rook be the moral equivalent of, say, the S3 managed service?
I'm hoping that it is. I'm hoping that's what we're striving for. I'm hoping that when people decide that they're going to be an OpenShift customer, that they're going to look at this. The idea is that Amazon, Google, all these have service catalogs, right? I mean, that's why we created the service catalog. But for Red Hat, our value proposition is we're going to put every service imaginable in our catalog as an open source. You know, if it's an open source product, then we'll put it in our catalog, even if it's not, you know, maybe always in our best interest, which is like a funny thing that we do, right? But that experience should be a like for like. And the importance of that is also when we come into hybrid cloud, that if I'm on AWS and I decide to transition all my stuff over to OpenShift, it's very similar in the way that I interact with the storage layer. And that stuff should be that equivalent. It shouldn't feel any different from the way I'm provisioning, you know, an object store in AWS that it does on OpenShift.
That makes sense. And so from that, I'm trying to understand the layering of this. So it seems to me that if somebody was using the open source broker, then they've already set it up. They've figured out how to run, you know, etcd cluster to manage it and do all that stuff they need to. Writing the broker piece that makes Rook appear in the open service catalog, that makes sense if people want to do that. Writing the code to provision, say a bucket or a file system within the open service framework,
like 1 to 2 at best.
That would make sense too. And it seems to me like the open service broker approach would layer on top of Rook. I'm not seeing what has to change in Rook to support it yet.
I think we just have to tie the two together so it's not multiple layers to set things up. So when I'm accessing it from the open service broker or the catalog, whatever operator I use to deploy that in there, it's already configured to use, you know, either like a default storage class that's already set up for Ceph with, you know, the proper keys and secrets. I mean, it just works. The idea is that I click that and it works, and I'm not having to like go, oh, you know what? Oh, now I need to configure this and I need to go out and get these keys, and you know, it just works. So you have exactly the right vision for it, but sewing all those things together so they actually work well tends to be the challenge with all of these things.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're happy to explore.
So what we did for CNS, okay, perfect. And also, I can share with you what I have with Sage in the past. Authentication was one of those sticky points that's weird that we should iron out. Like the Gluster team created like an Ansible playbook that runs. That's obviously not the way we want to go long term. We'd rather have an operator that deploys all this, but that's the vision. I think everyone's on the same page.
I wonder if, Yehuda wrote the broker code that's sitting on GitHub. I wonder if the path forward is to make Rook deploy that, automate the deployment and configuration of that broker.
I would have thought about it slightly differently, Sage. I would have thought that if instead of the broker that goes directly to RGW, you could write a broker that deploys a Rook cluster or calls, creates the custom resources used by Rook to generate, you know, provision a bucket or an object store. So essentially a layering. If you think of open service broker as a consumer of Rook, just like a user would be, right? Then the layering is open service broker consumes Rook and then does the whatever shimming it needs to do for open service broker too.
As long as the life cycles match up, because when application X gets deployed and they're like, I need object storage, we don't want to deploy a new Rook cluster because there's probably already one deployed. You want to consume the existing storage hardware resources that are already set up.
That's right.
But once the And then there's also the setup of the broker itself. That's specific to those service source.
That one seems outside the scope of like Rook in general to me. It's it seems like that one is a pretty heavyweight one to make part of Rook.
Okay.
Should there be an open service operator, open service broker operator?
Well, maybe not setting up the open service broker, or not the open service operator for the catalog or whatever, but the specific broker instance whose job it is to broker object bucket deployments. That's tied into the particular Ceph cluster.
I see.
Right, it's the equivalent of declaring the volume or storage pool or whatever, CRD, the moral equivalent of that for object, which in reality is actually deploying this service broker endpoint that knows how to create buckets for you on your behalf and ferry all the credentials back and forth, whatever it is.
I think we should explore that. I think that makes sense.
Okay. Okay. So the original concern was that we want the ability to dynamically provision buckets without having to have all the complexity and overhead of a service catalog and a broker. Is that still a desired requirement? Should we like try to layer the two so that the broker is posting CRDs?
I think the way I'm thinking about it is that I mean I'm personally not a big fan of the access through a service broker, but that's not if people want to use that, then they should be able to, right? Mm-hmm. If another approach emerges that can do dynamic provisioning of resources or managed services without having to go through the service broker, then great, they can coexist. But they don't.
I think one idea would be
or the other.
I think one idea, as Sage kind of implied with the layering, is to have CRDs for it, and for each basically object store that is created, we simply create Kubernetes objects, and with that we have persistence for the information that these object stores and other stuff exist.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and part of the discussion on that issue that we had open, I think, was a little, I think we were trying to compare or talk about approaches of how to consume or implement dynamic provisioning from the app. And I think from a Rook standpoint, we should just, we should not be that opinionated.
Yeah. I guess the higher level goal, it seems to me, I don't know if this is feasible or not, but when you're deploying an application, you should be able to say, I want a bucket. And I don't know if it's the broker mechanism or something else that should be able to say, oh, well, you are on AWS and the storage classes, policies, or whatever set up for this cluster are such that I'm going to provision you an S3 bucket. Or you're on-prem or you're running Rook or whatever it is, and I'm going to link you to RGW instance. I don't know if that's possible to fully.
That abstraction does not exist in Service Broker. You're picking a very specific implementation. You're referencing the name of the implementation through the broker and the provider for it. And you're specifying things that look like concrete implementation values to populate it with.
But as long is the rest of the path the same? Is it like you're changing your YAML to say, I want this to be an S3 bucket versus I want this to be a Rook class foo bucket?
Well, your app is probably compiled with an S3 client of some sort, so that part should be the same. But the specification for provisioning and usage through the service broker is very implementation specific. So the YAML is very different.
Sounds to me that you'd create some meta broker that would do it, right? You could.
Right, exactly. So that was the spirit of the proposal we were looking at in this issue, is that can we create a CRD that represents an abstract bucket and is not tied to a given implementation, and that based on context, that the right bucket gets provisioned and the application doesn't need to know about it. That was the spirit, and that seems unless you start doing meta brokers and all sorts of other stuff, that was hard to achieve with the existing service broker approach.
So the Rook CRD might, in fact, go create an S3 bucket for you, you're saying?
Correct.
Okay.
That was the spirit of that design. I don't think we've pursued it in the Rook context, but that was the spirit of design. But, honestly, I think if people are using the service broker today and they don't care about this kind of, workload portability, I don't see why as a Rook community, we shouldn't support that scenario.
Yeah.
So we can separate them, right?
I think that is the end goal, though, is to be able to do everything we can to enable the workload portability. The same way it is with PVs, like all you have to do is specify the storage class.
I
right.
couldn't agree. I couldn't agree anymore.
Yeah. Okay.
But again, should we all go invest in a new workload portability solution and ignore service broker, or should we do both?
I think we should investigate what the other services have done as we move to 4.0 in the catalog. I think we can use the broker as our baseline, but I think that the idea is, though, that all the services available in there will be driven by some sort of operator. But I think it would be a great idea just to create some sort of doc that describes the current state of the art, what we're planning on moving to, what we're capable of, and see what work items would need to be created to get, to parity, and then do a comparison, go out to AWS and deploy some object store on there through S3 and see what that experience is like, and just worry about that piece first. Then the portability kind of is secondary, in my opinion. We can't boil the ocean with the portability right now. We just need to make it easy to consume object through the catalog.
Yes. And so we can break it out into maybe two goals, and they don't have to align in time. We could say enable consumption of Rook resources through the service broker. That could be a goal. And then separately, enable more workload portability for stateful services.
That seems completely reasonable for me, that those can be separated in that fashion.
Okay.
So the first one, I think we should probably explore with how we implement it. I think layering a Rook broker on top of Rook CRDs seems like a reasonable start from my perspective. And we can talk about packaging and deployment and where it runs. And so I don't know who wants to kind of drive that, but we should probably start with a design for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Jared had to drop off, so he passed the torch over to me as far as the recording and things. But I think, well, if that's all for that topic, are there any other topics to cover today?
Yehuda, are you the person that wants to kind of drive this, just this broker discussion, or is it someone else?
Well, I'm not sure I'm qualified to drive the broker discussion. I can assist with the technical aspects of the RGW, how it's tied in, and with the current RGW broker implementation.
Yeah, I think Aaron and Yehuda and Travis and I have to have a conversation offline and try to figure out what the path is for it here, and go from there. I guess submit a design doc. That's a strong one.
Sounds good. Okay. Happy to jump on a different call if we need to. Or
yep. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, guys. I'm excited about it.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Yep. Thanks.
Yeah.
Blaine, did you have something?
Yeah, I had just sort of an open question. Jan was wanting to have a discussion about like Ceph volume, and sort of long term there might be some changes that would be good in Ceph volume, so that the same sort of things can be used for DeepC and for Ansible and for Rook. But he wanted to have like a more technical meeting about it. And I didn't know if that would be a good thing to have in next week's Rook meeting, or if something sort of one-off should be scheduled.
Yeah, why don't we plan that as a one-off, because our next meeting won't be for 2 weeks for this meeting, and
Okay.
I think we want to get going sooner on. Yeah, we can meet.
Yeah.
Sooner in the next couple of days, probably.
Yeah, that was kind of my thought and Jan's thought as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'll ping you offline to schedule that.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Sounds great. Anything else?
No, that's all.
All right, I'll go ahead and stop the recording now, and we'll call it a day. Thanks, everyone.